Okay, we're on.
Hey, late night for Willowdale. We're talking. Actually, We're doing this from AC Ranch at Dufferin and St. Clair on a very cold Toronto night, -20. So the topic is pipelines. Oh, is that working, please?
Yeah, it's working.
Okay. The topic is pipelines and indigenous rights. So I just sent a letter to Now Magazine because they had a couple of articles, Death of Reconciliation, and what was the other one, please?
I forgot the headline.
Whose land is it anyway?
Whose land is it anyway? Yeah.
And I just sent a letter because I thought, you know what? It's enough is enough. Yes, we need to respect indigenous rights.
They were here a long time before us,
yes,
right?
they were here a long time before us, and we need to take their rights into consideration. But enough is enough. Like the LNG pipeline. What was that called again, please?
The GasLink.
The GasLink.
The GasLink pipeline.
GasLink was approved by many indigenous leaders and approved by all the communities along the way. And why are all of a sudden these protests? I don't know. And the RCMP broke them up, but it wasn't that violent. Come on, this is not Brazil, or they did it. It wasn't that violent or anything bad. They just broke it up, and this created a lot of protests across the country, including here in Toronto, blocking highways and all this. It's ridiculous. Trans Mountain Pipeline, the expansion was approved by many communities, indigenous communities, and that's been delayed. So what I'm trying to say is, in this short video, is enough is enough. We've given a lot of consideration to indigenous communities and indigenous rights in this country, and they don't have the right to block these pipelines, whether it's the LNG or the Trans Mountain. I'm sorry. Economic development is important to this country, and it's certainly important to indigenous communities, who a lot of them live in poverty or near poverty. And
That's fine. Go ahead.
yes, there are many indigenous nations, so-called indigenous nations, across Canada. But in many ways, this is a fantasy land. There's only one nation. It's the Canadian nation. It's the Canadian state. And the state has the rule of law behind them. And yes, there are 13 provincial governments, or 10 provincial governments, and 3 territorial governments. And they all have the rule of law behind them. And I know there have been different agreements with Aboriginal bands and stuff, but there's only one state. There's not like 5,000 Aboriginal states, and there's one state. It's the Canadian state, and the Canadian state has the rule of law behind it. Yes, it's horribly politically incorrect as it is to say, Europeans conquered North America, and yes, the indigenous people were conquered and left behind. And in many parts of Latin America and the United States, they were treated horribly, and they were treated horribly in Canada as well. But Canada has actually, more than any other country in the world, that has to deal with Aboriginal or indigenous issues, and that includes Australia, New Zealand, whatever. Certainly the U.S. and many parts of Latin America. Canada's dealt with it, in the last number of years, pretty good. And it's not perfect. It's not perfect. And Trudeau has tried to reset relations with indigenous communities. And again, not perfect, but he's tried. And there is one rule of law in this country, and it's the law of the state, and that's the Canadian state. And we need to get these pipelines built, and whether it's the LNG GasLink or it's the Trans Mountain going to Burnaby, we need to get it built. And we need to basically ignore these indigenous protests and all their fellow travelers, because I'm sorry, it's very important to the Canadian economy. And And a lot of these projects will benefit indigenous communities. And this whole idea of, indigenous communities, land and water close to the environment, that's all a crock. I mean, that's just some sort of, whatever. It's important that we...
well, if you're going to base it on something, you base it on science at least, right?
You base it on science, and these projects have been environmentally improved, and they have been approved by the National Energy Board, and yes, there are always going to be environmental consequences, because nothing's perfect, but nothing is perfect. So, what I'm saying is, it's time to ignore all these indigenous protests and the fellow environmental travelers and get these projects built. And if people protest, well, fine, that's great. I've been to jail for what I believed in, and send them to jail.
I would never go to jail for what I believe in. I just wouldn't.
You know what? The bottom line is, the thing that happened in northern British Columbia last week was a crock. The RCP didn't use a lot of violence. It's just a crock, okay? And the majority of Canadians, according to an Angus Reid poll, want pipelines built. They want oil and natural gas going to market. And a lot of people are getting tired of sopping to the indigenous communities, which they see are innately corrupt. Nothing's going anywhere on this file. And most Canadians are just saying, whatever. Okay. So people are thinking, okay, well, I'm a whack job. I'm just a racist, nutty whack job. No, I'm not. I believe that you got to help indigenous communities, but there's so much corruption in the native bands, the native band councils. They operate like third world countries. They operate like Robert Mugabe in Zimbabwe. I often thought, and I've written about this, that one of the best things we could do is get fresh water to all these isolated Aboriginal communities, whether on James Bay or northern Manitoba or North Saskatchewan. If we can't do that in a country that's 5% of the world's fresh water, that's unbelievable. But a lot of it doesn't happen because, yes, inept government policy, but also corruption on native bands, and the corruption in the whole indigenous sort of project. I always think, let's forget about the grand projects, all these inquiries. Let's get fresh water to all these communities. We could easily do it. Probably cost a couple of $1 billion. Every indigenous community in this country would have fresh water. But it doesn't happen for all sorts of reasons. And that's why I'm very cynical about all these, these band councils and Bellegarde and all these people wanted to really make it. They would do things, but a lot of these guys are corrupted. They're totally corrupted by the system. And anyways, the bottom line is this. You can make, I've said in many videos, incremental change is the key. Forget the grand projects, we can make incremental changes in indigenous people's lives. We could easily get fresh water to every community if we really wanted to.
Why don't we, though?
Yeah, why don't we? That's the interesting thing.
That's a good question.
That's a good question. But we could easily. A couple of $1 billion would probably provide fresh water in every Aboriginal or indigenous reserve or isolated community. Why don't we? Forget about the opposition to all the pipelines and all that. That's sappy and it gets attention. But we need to stop. We need to stop paying attention to all this stuff. I think reconciliation, that whole thing, I think the Trudeau government has made a serious attempt, but at some point you got to say, screw you, we're getting these pipeline projects built. We know there are a lot of people in indigenous communities that support them, and we're going to do it. And if people protest it, fine. We'll just clear them out, and don't have to treat them harshly. Just clear them out, and we'll get these projects done. And we're not talking massive. We're talking one pipeline to Burnaby and an LNG project to Prince Rupert or Kitimat or whatever. Come on. Canada is not being ravaged by pipeline projects. And at some point, you've got to pay less attention to indigenous issues and more attention to the economy. And I know it's a hard thing for Trudeau to swallow, a hard thing for Trudeau to do because he's trying to play both sides of the coin. But yeah, I think many more Canadians are getting tired of indigenous protests. And indigenous people are losing a lot of support. And unfortunately, like I said in the beginning of the video, yes, you were conquered by Europeans. And yes, I think in many ways you need to assimilate. I'm sorry. There's not 5,000 nations in Canada. There's one state. It's called the Canadian state. And there are 10 provincial governments and 3 territorial governments. And yeah, this whole idea, this fairyland, fantasy land of, of Aboriginal Avatar sort of thing, guys running around in their ponytails. Like, I'm sorry. Like, no, there's no fantasy land here. This is real stuff. And I know a lot of people on the left, they want to have this idea of the spirits and the trees and all that crap. Well, whatever.
Animism, right? I think they call
Animism.
that animism.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's over. A lot of the indigenous people need to assimilate. You keep the culture where you can. In Nunavut, that was easy. Inuk is the language of the people. That was easy. I've been to Nunavut. It's great. It works. But it's not going to hold sway. Canada's not a country of 10,000 nations. Okay, I'm sorry. It's one state. 10 provincial governments, 3 territorial governments, 1 Nunavut, which is an Aboriginal government, which is amazing. And I've been there, and it's amazing. And yes, we need to take indigenous issues into consideration, but at some point they can't halt the economic progress of this country. And a lot of indigenous people have got to assimilate. I'm sorry. That's just what needs to happen. And I'm sorry, the European conquest is a reality. It took place, and Canada has done better than most countries in dealing with it. And yeah, politically incorrect as it is to say, but it's true. And we need to get these pipelines built, and there's a lot of indigenous support for these pipelines. And the problem is that a lot of these indigenous people get co-opted by the lefty environmental movements and all these people, and it's pretty pathetic. Okay. That video's gone on a bit longer than I wanted. There's so much to talk about from Late Night from Willowdale. What's going on with the U.S., what's going on in the Middle East.
Well, Syria comes to mind right
yeah,
away.
Syria comes to mind today. A big explosion in
Kenya too, right?
In northern, Al-Shabaab is active in Kenya and Nairobi. I don't know why these crazy people, these crazy nutty Islamist types have not been defeated. And that's a whole different issue.
Well, it's kind of a mixture of, it's a little bit of a mixture of poverty and and oppression and the common kind of thinking on ISIS and all these people is that they're just poor Muslims. But I mean, they're poor Muslims, but they've also been kind of through a bit of Iranian influence in some countries. You know what I mean?
And these groups have arisen in Africa, particularly in East Africa, is interesting. It's
who are allied with ISIS, by the way.
I know there's a whole story there in East Africa in particular. We can't go there tonight. No question, ISIS hasn't been defeated in Syria.
Neither Iraq.
And the Americans shouldn't. Yes, I do believe the United States should not be involved in endless wars, and the U.S. But they need to. There is a way to have a negotiated settlement in Syria, but the Americans don't believe in that. You need to have Iran, Russia, the big players involved. And yes, there's an explosion in Manjib today in northern Syria on the Turkish border. That says something. There, ISIS has not been defeated. Yes, you need a negotiated withdrawal from Syria, and a lot of Syria, Humpty Dumpty can't be. Humpty Dumpty fell off the wall and ain't gonna,
Can't be put back together
ain't
again.
gonna be put back together again. Syria is a destroyed country.
I'm not getting this around, not the
But
plight. But
I
yeah.
do think, there's going to be a Kurdish enclave. There's going to be, we don't know where it's all going to go. But Syria is a destroyed place. It's a non-state right now. There's a little enclave around Damascus and Assad's forces, supported by the Iranians and the Russians. But yeah, it's a non-state. It's a destroyed country. Where it all goes, we'll see. Everyone has interests. The Turks. Erdogan wants to reestablish the Ottoman Empire. He wants to smash the Kurds. I mean, so it's. I do believe if you had an American president that was active and interested in foreign affairs, Obama could have done this, but he sort of lost interest. You got to bring all the players together: the Turks, the Iranians, the Russians, and. Yeah. Even the Saudis, who I hate, who I can't stand. You got to bring everybody together. In Afghanistan, you've got to bring the Iranians, the Russians, the Indians, the Pakistanis. Again, even the Saudis, who have influence. But Trump has this weird view. Trump is trying to cement this weird anti-Iranian arc in the Middle East with the Saudis, the Gulf states. It's not playing well because
off the record, he has been known to say that he doesn't care what Iran does, right? Like,
exactly. He doesn't really care. But
ideologically, he doesn't really give a fuck.
Trump has a close relationship with Israel, and they want to have this weird anti-Iranian sort of arc, which is not going to work because the Iranians are very powerful in the Middle East. In a lot of Arab countries, if you go westward in the Arab world, they don't care about Iran. They don't see Iran as a threat. People in Morocco don't see Iran as a threat. Egypt really doesn't see Iran as a threat. It's just this weird Saudi Gulf thing, and you need to have better relations with Iran. Iran could solve a lot of your problems. You just need to get over your hatred of Iran. Obviously not going to happen because Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, is a whack job. And he just toured the Middle East, meeting with every butcher and murderer and trying to get this anti-Iranian coalition together, which probably won't work because a lot of people in the Middle East don't have the same hatred of Iran that the U.S. administration, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states have. So we'll see where the hell it goes. It's all very fluid right now. Okay, we're going to end this video, but because I have to end this video. We don't know where the Mueller investigation is going, and it's for many of us it's just getting tiresome. CNN is the Trump Mueller news network. There's so many things going on in the world, and CNN just can't get off Trump or Mueller. The Brexit stuff is amazing stuff going on in Britain, but you never see that on CNN. And that's a whole different topic. We'll talk about Brexit and why the Brits are in such a crazy position.
I think a second referendum is in
I think
order.
a second referendum is needed.
Yes.
But we'll talk about it in another video. But look at that headline. FBI investigated if Trump worked for the Russians. That was in the New York Times a little over a week ago. But last Saturday. Can you imagine? Think about this, anyone watching this video. Can you ever imagine a headline in the New York Times saying that the FBI is investigating where the President of the United States is a Russian agent? Can you imagine? Think about it. FDR, Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, LBJ, Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan.
Are you saying it's
Bush
like beyond
1, Bush 2,
okay.
Clinton, no one, you ever imagine a New York Times headline that says, the FBI is investigating whether Trump was a Russian agent.
Yeah, that one made headlines around the world.
Yeah, and that's amazing. And who knows where this is all going to go. You have to think about it, though. It's really amazing. Okay, I'm going to end this video about Venezuela. All right?
Bolsonaro.
A lot of people on the left love Maduro. he's a thug and a murderer, and a lot of people on the left get caught up with these dictators, right? You know, a lot of them originally loved Mugabe, who was the thug and a murderer. They loved Maduro, they loved Castro, who was also a thug and a murderer. Don't get me wrong, I think Castro did some good things in Cuba. And
Free healthcare, right?
yeah, exactly, free healthcare and all that. But Maduro bankrupted. Chavez and Maduro has destroyed one of the wealthiest countries in the world. Okay, the inflation rate in Venezuela is like 10 million% or something. It's so astronomical you can't even believe it. 90% of Venezuelans live in poverty. This is a country that has more oil than like it has as much oil as Saudi Arabia, and it's been bankrupted and pillaged by all these lefties and yeah, Venezuela's a disgrace. And hopefully this year there's massive opposition. Hopefully this year the Maduro government will fall, and I don't know what's going to happen. But Venezuela, the biggest migrant crisis in Latin America is not on the U.S. border. It's Venezuelans fleeing to Colombia, to Brazil, to other countries. You know,
A lot of them want to go to the United States.
Venezuela is leaving just to get out. And I know a lot of people on the left love Venezuela. Oh, he's Chavez, Bolivarism and Chavez. I mean, a lot of people on the left are stupid. Venezuela's been bankrupted by the most corrupt, most vicious, nasty people. And 90% of Venezuelans live in poverty. So all the people on the left who love Chavez, love Maduro, the same people who love Castro and, all the lefties. I'm sorry, Venezuela's a disgrace, absolute disgrace. And I'm glad Canada and many countries have condemned Maduro's reign, and hopefully he falls. Venezuela's heading to a place of real chaos, but I think there's finally the beginnings of a massive opposition to Maduro, and I hope he falls. And I know, I say this as a criticism of the left, a lot of these lefties love him, the cult of personality. A lot of people on the left love the cult of personality. And unfortunately, you need to look at the facts. And the facts are that Venezuela is one of the poorest countries in the world, even though it's one of the wealthiest countries in the world. And a lot of the money was siphoned out by Maduro, Chavez, and all his lefty buddies. And 90% of Venezuela lives in poverty, and probably what is one of the wealthiest countries in the world. On that note, good night. Late night from Willowdale.